So I thought I'd talk a little bit today about how I experienced sacred tobacco. And if you don't mind, I may kind of go, as you may have noticed already in this podcast, sometimes the messages I have on this podcast they kind of come from a mediumistic kind of way of communicating. So sometimes the organization of my thoughts is a little bit hard to get codified so that it's, clear for everybody. So I just indulge your patience in wading through some of the content because it comes from me, but it also comes from the spirit guides that I work with on a regular basis. And maybe I'll talk about that sometime. But today I wanted to talk about sacred tobacco because I'm kind of coming back to it again and again because for me personally it has been and continues thankfully to be a very prominent spirit in my life. So some of you already think like this and live and have your realities in this way, so you may already understand what I'm saying. But for anybody who's kind of like not quite picturing where I'm coming from here, up until I'd say, I've had psychic experiences my whole life, off and on, but to be honest, I didn't really want to deal with them, or I kind of forced myself not to deal with them in any way. Although I shouldn't, that's a bit extreme. There were kind of moments in my life early on where, in my teens and even in my childhood and teen years and well into my 20s where, I had moments where I kind of went through some phases where I was engaging in a positive way with psychic forces, but I wasn't like focusing on it, you know what I mean? It wasn't like a priority in my life at the time, with the exception of tarot. I think tarot in my mid-20s, when I was about 24, 25, tarot became very prominent in terms of me actually practicing doing tarot readings in my own life as a means to kind of help myself understand what I was going through at the time. But that's another story. So anyway, fast forward to, let's say, 2007. So that's, right now it's 2023, so that was about 16 years ago. And I'd say 2007, 2008, I was about, 30, late 30s, in my late 30s at that point. And I know I always say this, but, and maybe someday I'll feel comfortable talking about the horrible experiences I went through at that point. But they were pretty awful, and they're hard to talk about because it's kind of like it's hard to describe. I'm sure eventually I'll find a way of talking about it, but all I can tell you is the experiences I was having at that point were so they were experiences that could not be helped in the society network that we had at that time and that we currently have right now. I think there's maybe a few more people, that maybe know how to deal with the problems I had at that time. While I did have physical health problems at the time, I was having what many would call a spiritual crisis. But it was also I call it a psychic attack, and I also call it just kind of an overload of not knowing how to, it's not just having boundaries, but I think, in every system of being, if a person doesn't have a way to kind of close off something that's detrimental to that system. For example, a pile of garbage that keeps piling up eventually is going to be a problem. Eventually the garbage has to be taken somewhere else, or disposed of in some way, or else it becomes a problem. So if you look at detrimental energy in the same way, that was what was happening to me. I was having a lot of kind of like a lifetime up to that point of not being able to deal with my gifts that I wasn't even consciously, I think maybe I was aware of them, but not aware enough to know that I need to really take this seriously, And so once something, and I'm sorry I'm being vague, but it's very hard to talk about some of the experiences I always have. All I can say immediately without getting into other details is I was hearing things, seeing things, feeling things happening to me both in my dreams and my nightmares as well as my waking life that other people couldn't hear, that I was feeling things that, I'm not talking about emotions here, I'm talking about actual physical, I'm sure some people would call it ectoplasm, or I don't really like that word, but just an overaccumulation of not good stuff that made me just feel kind of crazy. I didn't feel certifiably crazy. I just felt like I couldn't find anybody to help me, And so I think it's a little easier for me to talk about this in terms of tobacco, because at the time I had been, I was kind of a heavy smoker at that point, just like everybody else who smokes for the most part that I know of. I'm going to call that commercial smoking. And that's what most people know as quote-unquote smoking, which is where you see smokers become addicted to commercial tobacco. And because what they're doing is they're just getting a nicotine hit, and they're actually getting a hit of much more than nicotine, a ton of additives and toxic things that don't even have anything to do with the tobacco. To some extent, some cigarettes have like more crap in them than actual tobacco, to be honest. And so that's another, aspect of quote-unquote smoking that people need to consider when they think of tobacco as being this horrible thing, which it kind of is, if you look at it that way. Of course, tobacco has caused a lot of destruction. However, there's a big however here, and this may require several explanations, because I think it's a really hard topic to talk about. And that's why I'm trying to make myself communicate about it to you guys, both to relay the usefulness of it. That's my whole impetus for doing this. So getting back to 2007, when I was having all these horrible things happen to me, especially on the astral plane. Some of you people know what astral plane is, and unfortunately, the more gifted a person is who doesn't know how to use their gifts, like I was at that time. And I think, when you work at something, you get better and better at it because you have a means to get better at it in the first place. But if you don't know how to use your gifts in a way that is helping you, sometimes those same gifts can be used against you. And I'm sure there's many people who know what I'm talking about. And so that's what was happening to me. And so at the time, like I said, I was smoking, I don't know, at least 4 or 5 cigarettes a day, sometimes 7. Actually, no, I think it was more like 7 or 8. I wasn't on a really horrible day, it was up to maybe a half a pack a day, I think. And there were other times where I would binge smoke, like a lot. But day-to-day smoking, I think worst case scenario was up to maybe 10 cigarettes a day. And this is before I had any kind of concept of what sacred tobacco was. I had no idea what was going on with that. But I did notice one thing. I did notice that obviously I can actually remember back to prior to my understanding the sacred tobacco plant spirit the way I do now. I do remember occasionally having feelings where I wasn't just smoking to, relieve stress, which is what I think most people do, and feel better and increase. I think it increases one of the hormone levels, and we all know this, the physiological and physical effects of nicotine. Okay, it's pretty well documented, both detrimental and temporarily making you feel better. But I think what I got out of it also was I did feel, even back then, this kind of like, when I would blow the smoke out, I did feel like there was this kind of clearing of energy. And so I think I even got that concept like a little bit. It wasn't something I thought about, I just remember feeling a little bit better occasionally, especially if I was around a lot of negativity, which I was constantly, as well as my own negativity at the time. And, I think sometimes when you're a sensitive person or an empath or somebody with psychic abilities, despite what you're trying to do in your life to make your life better, whether you are trying to make your life better or not, it's hard to be around not even just other people, but if you're in an area that's got a lot of, toxic energy in it, it can just be, there can be like zero humans there, and it can just be an area that's got a lot of toxic energy, an abandoned house or something or whatever, or it can be anything like that. It doesn't even have to be humans, but then, sometimes there are some types of empaths who have a hard time with groups of humans that are like large groups where it's just hard to kind of filter out like the overwhelm of sensitivity, or I should say sensory signals that are coming at you and stuff. So I remember I would take a smoke break, and I knew that obviously everybody knows smoking's terrible for you. And I knew that, but I was temporarily made to feel better by this kind of clearing. Okay, so a series of events happens that are really miraculous and wonderful, where I start having these experiences where I'm seeing various figures that I can't really talk about right now, but they were positive figures that represented certain deities or helping spirits that were helping me out through this terrible crisis I was going through. And they tended to happen when I was at like a local area that was known to be kind of a sacred area of course in nature. And usually a lot of these, by the way, if you're in the United States, and you have to tread carefully because sometimes these areas are complicated as well, but a lot of these places, and you have to be respectful, are of Native American heritage, and they're usually in state parks. So I was going to various public parks and having really profound experiences with sacred sites while this trauma was going on, and while I was still heavily smoking. Fast forward a few years later, I'd say at least 3 years later, 3 to 4 years later of doing this, and I can go back to that time period again and describe more of what was happening then, because there was a lot of trial and error in trying to, I wasn't really working with tobacco at that point. I was trying to do other things, like I was trying to learn about oils, and I was learning about sacred smoke a little bit. I was smudging a lot, that's for sure. I was using various incenses to smudge my area because I felt like that sacred smoke was really helping me a lot. I was smudging my room, and that was something that made me feel better. And if it made me feel better, I thought it must be doing some kind of healing on some level. So fast forward 3-4 years, and I've talked about this a little bit, but I'll probably talk about that again someday. I was fortunate enough to get initiated with an medicine bundle, and subsequently I was really fortunate to have a initiation with sacred tobacco. So what happened was, at that point, I'd say that was about 2012, so a good 5 years had gone by. So there was a big time period in between me being in a real crisis and then having some kind of initiation gift of medicine that I was able to work with. And that was in 2012, so roughly 11 years ago. And from that point on, what I had to go through after that was weekly ceremonies where I learned how to, and I did this on my own. When I say on my own, I did it with other people, but I did not have a human teacher showing up at my house and or me going to their house and where they would talk me through it. I got one initiation ceremony, which was hugely, I'm hugely grateful for that. But all the work after that was me and the tobacco spirit. And that went on for, I'd say, 7 years. Till about 2019, where I did weekly ceremonies, and during that 7 years I went through a lot of changes, both materialistically as well as physically, emotionally, mentally, spiritually, and every time I had a problem, I went to the sacred tobacco spirit as well as my medicine bundle, of course, and they helped me. And in particular, Grandfather Tobacco Spirit became very important and still is. And he's my main, he's one of a small group of course the group is getting bigger at this point because I'm starting to expand my list of helping spirits, and that's, quantity is not what it's about. It's like sometimes you just need to have people specialize in different things, and I think that's true on the helping spirits end. Whether you're dealing with multiple traditions from different countries or one tradition, you just find that you may need some help in different areas that only certain deities can help with. But anyway, Sacred Grandfather Tobacco Spirit helped me understand the multi-dimensionality of tobacco. And this is what I want to get across to people. And I think you could apply this to a lot of other things. I've said this many times. It's not my quote. It's, I think, Voltaire. But with great power comes great responsibility. And I think you can say that for every single power plant that's out there, or every single, even if it's an element, a great element like the sea, Mother Ocean, it envelops the entire earth. And if we don't take care of the sea, we've got problems, right? So, and you could say that this Mother Ocean has extremely, awesome power, right? And power can go many different directions, especially if the people who are working with it are not feeding it. And I think that's a general, when I say feeding it, I mean that could be with love, that could be, obviously there's some actual caretaking that's involved where you don't want to poison, literally poison the water. And you could say the same thing for tobacco, because what a lot of people don't know, and I didn't really either until I did a little bit of reading and research, but up until 500 years ago in pre-colonial, before colonization, which is before Western culture, I'd say predominantly European culture at that time, European culture in the 1500s, the 1400s. Prior to the 1400s, had European descent people discovered tobacco, they might not have done the same thing that they did with it in the 1500s. That's just I'm just going to put that out there, because at that point in time, Western European society is thoroughly steeped in this idea of separation from nature, therefore separation from spirits. While there is still a lot of people practicing folklore, there's still predominantly a thematic meme, if not, mind control and, spiritual, people are literally told that they're not allowed to, do what their ancestors did on European land. Okay, so that's where it starts, and then of course Europeans start doing that to everybody else. Ergo, they start doing it to Caribbean America, the natives of Caribbean areas, and Mesoamerica, and obviously North America and South America and the rest of the world. Okay, so tobacco, from a post 1500s perspective, which is the one that we all know in the United States, we know nothing of what tobacco, the multidimensional sacred plant spirit, that if it would have not been used, abused, toxified, poisoned, enslaved, commoditized, prostituted for the last 500 years, maybe we all could have gotten to know it a little bit better in a healthy medicine way, and there wouldn't have been, maybe we wouldn't have had so much cancer. I'm not saying that tobacco isn't harmful. I'm not saying that you should start smoking tomorrow. What I'm saying is, there's so many benefits to getting to know a plant spirit, and you can do that without actually, for example, the way I teach, I don't teach this specific ceremony right now. And to be honest, I don't even think it's that necessary to know the ceremony, because what I do is I teach people like as much around the ceremony as possible, like without actually doing the ceremony. And to be honest, I think that's more important. It's more important for me. And what that means is there are ways you can work with tobacco without even, first off, you don't inhale it. So you don't have to worry when you work with it in a sacred way. There probably are situations where you might inhale it, depending on, there probably are other traditions where you might do that, but it's not even close to the same way as smoking it like most people do, which is, and even I, to this point, and by the way, I will tell you that now this is like losing weight, I've been trying to lose weight for the last, 10 years. And overall, I've lost 100 pounds, which is awesome. But I've still got about 20, 25, 30 pounds to go. And there have been moments when I've only had 10 pounds to go, or maybe 15 or 20 pounds to go. And, so I've fluctuated. But it's taken 10 years to get to that point. Okay? Now, I'm not saying, you can't lose weight in, less than a year. You can. But it's a process of learning how to, eat better, right? And learning how to treat your body better, and just learning how to, do a lot of things behaviorally. Well, it's the same thing with how we relate to spirits, and especially to a spirit as powerful and as grand and as, amazing as tobacco. And tobacco is given a bad rap because the people that sell it to us, and they have sold it to us for the last 500 years, or, well, for sure they've sold it to us for the last, it's been, if it wasn't sold, it was being traded, right? So, and when it was being traded, it was obviously being snuffed and, snorted and, immediately for the hit, right? For the high. And believe me, I get that, okay? I understand where people are coming from with that. And you could say this about ayahuasca, you could say this about cannabis, you could say this about cacao, you could say this about any power plant. The great teaching power plants that are considered entheogens, Wachuma, which is San Pedro cactus spirit. The plant spirits that are being ingested now are very popular, and that's fine, as long as you're going to somebody who knows what they're doing with psychotropic medicine and understands, the physical and emotional things that go along with that. Obviously, that's a whole nother area that I'm not saying that's not an area I'm an expert in. What I do know is, because I've dealt both with tobacco on a very skim commercial basis in the last, I'd say in the last 3 years, I've gotten down to 1 cigarette a day. So, and what I did, because you'll remember I said I had started, it took me 7 years of weekly ceremonial practice with the tobacco spirit to get to that point where, he would talk to me, and he needed to make sure that I meant business. And I think, when you go through an initiation with a spirit, you have to do certain things that, like, they ask you to, and of course you'll know if it feels right for you, and if it's not the right time, you can always come back to it. But my point is, this is how it is when you're dealing with a non-human spirit. And it's very real, but it's hard to communicate to other people because it didn't come from a human, It literally came from a spirit. And it came from this wonderful thing that everybody hates so much. So, and what I really want to stress again is the multidimensionality of something really powerful can be perceived in many different levels. So like the base level, the bottom, if we want to look at it hierarchically, the bottom basement level, and actually it's sub-basement, would be tobacco the way we know it now, which is full of chemicals. It's been abused and, like I said, prostituted and just like ignored in its respect for like 500 plus years. And so naturally, when something that powerful has that much potential and it's been abused that long, it's probably going to rear its ugly head and create problems. And so, and that's where people who are skilled can come in and teach people, which is what I'm trying to do, how to look at things differently. It's not a simple thing where, what I'm saying to you will like automatically make you like change your mind about how you feel about tobacco. But maybe I'll do another podcast about some of the benefits, the spiritual benefits that I've experienced even over the last, 10 years when I've been only smoking. Let's say 10 years ago, I think I was smoking maybe 3 cigarettes a day. Maybe 4. No, I think it was about 3. And then I'd say about 5 years ago, I went down to 2, and I stayed at 2 for a long time. And then when the pandemic hit, I was a little scared by the fact that, I was still at 2 cigarettes a day, and I went down to 1. And what I did, and I'll leave you with this, is because at that point I had been dealing with the sacred tobacco spirit for over 10 years, and I developed a rapport. What I did is I asked the sacred grandfather tobacco spirit when the pandemic started. I asked him, I said, can you please help me to get down to 1 cigarette a day, because I want to do this for my health. And actually I should say the first thing I said is I want to be in better relationship with you. And so that's what I'd like to leave you with, is that when you're working with, whether it's a plant spirit or an animal spirit or a stone spirit or a tradition or your medicine bundle or your garden on a spiritual level, anything, your sacred objects that you work with that are, imbued with energy from maybe a teacher, whatever you're working with, you always want to ask it, I just want to get in better relationship with you and help me do that. And so that's why I asked the tobacco spirit to do that for me. And it's been a really wonderful thing. So I'm able to, continue to work with tobacco in a different way than even I was 10 years ago, and totally in a different way than back in 2007, a much more respectful way, and in a way that maybe I can try to help other people. So I'll leave you with that for today, and I hope to talk to you soon.